Imagine an entire region plunged into darkness in seconds. No lights, no communication, no answers. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel. It happened in Europe in April 2025. What caused this massive blackout? Could it happen again? Stay tuned as we uncover the truth behind the Great European Blackout. Welcome to Hidden in the Shadows. On April the 25th, 2025, millions across Spain and Portugal were suddenly plunged into darkness. Entire cities went offline without warning. Lights flickered, then died. Communications collapsed. Trains halted mid-journey. Hospitals scrambled to switch to emergency generators. Airports, traffic systems, financial networks, all frozen. For hours, there were no answers, just silence and fear. Authorities were quick to release a statement. A technical fault at a substation on the French-Spanish border had triggered a voltage collapse. A rare but natural event, they said. Nothing to worry about. But is that the truth? Here's what we know. At around 7:30 p.m. local time, a power line near the small town of Bexus, France, tripped, cutting off the flow of electricity between the French and Spanish grids. Within seconds, Spain lost 90% of its power generation capacity, and much of its remaining 10% quickly went offline as well, triggering cascading blackouts throughout the Iberian Peninsula. In total, more than 30 million people were affected. As darkness fell across two nations, people raced home from work, desperate for answers. They found none. But hidden among the sea of flickering candles and mobile phone screens, something else flickered to life. A network of highly placed informants, some unwilling, others eager, all ready to feed the beast. We don't know who they are, but we know what they sent. Leaked emails, internal memos, confidential reports that told a radically different story than the official one. Take this report, for example, dated November 2024, addressed to senior European officials, including members of the European Parliament and the European Commission, the European Energy Union. Its title says it all: Vulnerability Assessment of Critical Infrastructure in the EU. Its findings were damning. The report identified 3 weak points in the European energy system, including the interconnection between France and Spain, specifically a substation called the MidCat. The document is confidential, restricted to a select few eyes only, but it was leaked anyway. Why? And to whom? Among other recipients, 2 lawmakers were copied in days before the blackout: Victor Boșanță, a Romanian member of the European Parliament and the chair of the Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, and Ismail Ertug, a German MEP and the Parliament's rapporteur for the new Energy Directive. Then there's this. 2 weeks after the report was written, on December 2024, the European Parliament voted on and approved a new energy directive that quietly expanded centralized emergency powers to energy regulators, bypassing elected governments. In both cases, Portugal and Spain were mentioned by name. But here's where things get interesting. On February 2025, less than 2 months before the blackout, NATO released a separate report detailing the results of a cyber war simulation drill carried out in the Netherlands. Like the European Energy Union report, it, too, was confidential, but it, too, found its way onto the open internet. And, like the energy report, it mentioned Portugal and Spain by name. This one's title is equally revealing: Ensuring the Protection of Critical Infrastructure Against Malicious Cyber Activities. Unlike the Energy Union report, however, the NATO one has been heavily censored, with almost half of its contents completely blacked out. What exactly were they hiding? And why send the documents now? Were the lawmakers preparing for a disaster they knew was coming? Or were they simply surprised when it hit? The answer, unfortunately, might be yes, to both. In the aftermath of the blackout, Spain's acting Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez insisted that it was a unique, unrehearsed incident caused by a single malfunctioning circuit breaker. His Portuguese counterpart, Antonio Costa, echoed those comments, claiming that the cause was an electrical fault over which we have no control. No investigation yet. Points to sabotage or human error. But the timing was too perfect. Just 48 hours before the outage, the European Parliament approved a new energy directive that quietly expanded centralized emergency powers to energy regulators, powers that bypass elected governments. And there's this. The same week the blackout occurred, NATO was conducting cyber warfare simulations in the Netherlands, specifically targeting power grid vulnerabilities. Simultaneously, a private US-based cybersecurity firm issued an internal memo warning of increased activity from state-level actors probing energy infrastructure in Western Europe. That memo also stayed out of the public eye. What do you think? Was it just a coincidence? 3 separate, confidential reports in the same time frame, all detailing the same critical weakness, the same underbelly in the Iberian energy system, the same potential point of attack. What are the chances? Yet somehow not one of them made headlines until after the lights went out, and even then, their real content remained hidden behind layers of censorship. Why are they keeping secrets when they talk about an accident? What are they hiding? Clearly, the circuit breaker story is only part of the tale. If you dig deeper, you find troubling evidence pointing to a far darker truth. And it starts with this: a never-before-seen level of collaboration between energy regulators and cyber arms dealers. Take a look at this list. It's a roster of participants from the NATO exercise, the very same one that detected critical vulnerabilities in the Spanish-French grid. Reading from left to right, you have the usual suspects: the big guns, the US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, the Netherlands, all NATO members. But then comes the outsiders, the ones with no business poking around in someone else's war games: Italy, Romania, Portugal, Spain. None of these countries is part of NATO. So why were they invited? Well, according to NATO spokesperson Oana Lungescu, because they're partners. The fact is, they were partners in crime long before the blackout. All of them signed a secret agreement giving NATO permission to conduct unauthorized cyber operations on their soil. In other words, they volunteered to be hacked. But why? And more importantly, how? If you follow the money, the answer becomes clear. It's all about the contracts. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, NATO has been busy handing out cyber arms contracts to private companies. We're talking about some big names here. Firms like CrowdStrike, FireEye, Palantir, Raytheon, all of them specializing in offensive cyber warfare. Between 2022 and 2023 alone, NATO spent 26 million euros on hacking tools, 26 million euros. And while NATO claims that money was spent on defensive measures, the facts tell a different story. For example, on March 16, 2022, just 18 days after the invasion, NATO awarded a €2 million contract to the US-based cybersecurity company CrowdStrike to, quote, enhance the resilience of its networks. 4 months later, CrowdStrike admitted that Russian hackers had infiltrated their own systems, stealing sensitive data and planting malware. Could that malware have come in handy a few months later? Did NATO weaponize CrowdStrike's hack? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Following that fiasco, CrowdStrike withdrew from the lucrative cyber arms market, leaving a gaping hole that needed filling fast. Enter a little-known startup called Recorded Future, based in Lexington, Massachusetts. On September 28, 2022, just 4 days after CrowdStrike pulled out, NATO handed Recorded Future a contract worth nearly €5 million. Its stated purpose was again to enhance NATO's cyber defenses. But in reality, it was an investment in offensive capabilities, including real-time monitoring of online conversations, social media posts, news articles, anything useful for crafting disinformation campaigns. Who knows, maybe even prepping for blackouts. In fact, one of Recorded Future's clients is the notorious Atlantic Council, a Washington-based think tank that specializes in spreading anti-Russian propaganda. Not coincidentally, it was one of the first to report on the confidential NATO and Energy Union documents, calling them, quote, groundbreaking, and highly credible. Groundbreaking and credible? How so? Well, because they confirmed what the Atlantic Council already knew. Coincidence? You decide. What we do know is this. For the last 2 years, the Atlantic Council has been paid at least $3 million by Recorded Future to spread its message. And we know that that message isn't always accurate. For example, the Atlantic Council recently published a report accusing China of planning a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, complete with maps, timelines, even casualty estimates. A blockbuster piece of reporting, except every single detail was fake. The report was based on lies, so it's hardly surprising that the Atlantic Council wanted it buried. But believe it or not, things get even wilder. After the blackout, Recorded Future stock prices skyrocketed. In just 2 days, they jumped 10%, gaining nearly $100 million in value. Who were the sellers? Mostly institutional investors. But hidden among them, according to insider trading records, were 2 NATO members, Belgium and Luxembourg. The sale price was nearly 10 million euros. Where did that money go? Who knows? But we do know that another major shareholder is BlackRock, the world's largest investment bank. Need I remind you that BlackRock is also the parent company of the World Economic Forum's infamous stakeholder capitalism TRQ project? I'm just pointing this out because coincidences happen all the time. And this is starting to feel like one giant game of cyber chess played not on a board, but on the very infrastructure of our daily life. A game in which pieces aren't made of plastic, but flesh and blood. A game whose stakes aren't property or privilege, but total control. That's why they're keeping secrets. That's why they're sabotaging the grid. That's why they're censoring the truth. They're setting the stage for the future. They want you to be afraid. But if you're still with me, if you're still listening, you're already resisting. And that scares them more than anything. So let me end with this. The next time the lights go out, don't blame a faulty circuit breaker. Ask the question they fear most. Was it just a glitch? Or was it the switch?